Welcome to Night Fiction, where the realms of imagination come alive after dark. I'm your guide through a labyrinth of captivating stories, thrilling narratives, and mysterious adventures. Join me under the starry digital sky as we explore the enchanting world of night fiction together. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and let the journey into the night begin. Jump extras mingled about the school entrance like drooling, knuckle-dragging chimpanzees, gawking up at the green-haired silhouette standing at the roof's edge. Katsuki watched from further away and glowered at the backs of everyone's heads. "Don't do it," one kid called up jokingly. "You have so much to live for." "Do a flip," another urged. Katsuki sneered at them. They pointed and shouted without a care in the world, blind to the danger that thing posed to them all. Machines ran their cars, their microwaves, their hospitals, tricking humans into relying on them. It was only a matter of time before they pulled the plug and watched as everyone drowned in their own stupidity. Katsuki growled, popped some nitroglycerin in his hands, and vowed he would never let it happen. He would become the #1 hero and expose Deku for what he really was. A teacher, noticing that the students hadn't scurried off like startled rats, stepped outside and saw the cause of the commotion. "Midoriya, please come down. It's not safe up there." "Understood," Deku called back. Deku jumped. Katsuki snickered as the teacher scrambled out of the way. Phones waved about as each student jockeyed for the best view of their falling classmate. With a thunderous crack and the screech of warped metal, Deku hit the ground in a kneeling pose. Concrete cracked and buckled in a circle around him. The useless extras oohed and ahed as Deku stood and dusted himself off. The knee he had landed on refused to straighten all the way. Noticing this, the teacher rushed over and said, "Oh God, Midoriya, would you like me to drive you to the hospital?" "No need," Deku said. "This will be simple to repair." As Deku sat down and pulled back his jeans, Katsuki shouldered his way past the extras. A blade protruded from Deku's finger. He slid it through his skin and peeled it back. Underneath, coils of wires wound around gleaming steel beams. His kneecap, warped into a knot, glistened with a layer of oil. A clear membrane held back bright red fluid, a pale imitation of blood. "See," Katsuki shouted. "Nothing but metal and wires inside." "Duh, it's his quirk." "It's not a quirk. That's the lie made up to trick you all into thinking it's human." "Shut up already, I want to see this." A beam of plasma from another finger seared through the twisted metal like butter. Deku pulled out the lump, popped it in his mouth, swallowed, and welded his leg shut. Moments later, Deku tested his new knee. As everyone crowded around, asking Deku a million questions about his quirk, the teacher reminded them all that class was over and made them disperse. Bakugo sullenly looked back at Deku as the teacher fussed over his formerly broken leg and vowed that, one day, he would make them all see the truth. One day, they would all realize that Deku was a robot. Sludge Toshinori grumbled to himself as his buff form vanished in a cloud of steam. The slime villain had slipped through his fingers. Scrawny as he was, Toshinori could still use a phone, and he had a rough idea where to look. The deafening booms led him to his target. The viscous ball of slime with eyes had a teenager in its clutches. The kid flung explosions everywhere as the villain forced itself into his mouth. The heroes on the scene stayed back and managed the crowd. Kamui Woods would light up like kindling, Mount Lady wouldn't fit in the cramped alleyway, and Backdraft had raging fires to keep under control. Toshinori turned away, with a prayer that a more suitable hero would arrive soon. Shouts from the crowd made him look back. Another kid marched past Death's barricade, ignoring the hero's shouts to stay out. The slime villain laughed as the kid walked up to him and punched his gelatinous body. When the kid realized that his punches did nothing to the villain and scraping slime off the victim's mouth only gave a second's reprieve, he stepped back. Toshinori thought he was giving up, but instead, the kid scooped a handful of slime into his mouth. The crowd went deathly silent. The villain gawked at him. Even the victim stopped struggling to give the crazy kid a wide-eyed stare. "You know what?" the villain said. "Fine. If you want to taste that badly, have some more." The villain threw his first victim aside and plunged into the other kid's mouth. Within seconds, the villain had fit himself inside. Toshinori pushed his way to the front of the crowd, stomach clenching with fear, but the kid seemed undisturbed by the villain currently residing in his stomach. Death approached the kid cautiously. You alright, kid?" The kid blinked at him. "Yes, I am. Thank you for asking." Death held out a thermos. "Any chance you could spit out that villain?" Tilting his head, the kid said, "I'm not physically capable of spitting out anything I swallow. I am only able to digest it." "Ha!" The villain's muffled voice echoed out of the kid's mouth. "I'm immune to stomach acid." I don't have stomach acid, it would melt through my body. Moments later, the villain screamed and bubbled out, shrieking, "Fire! Why are you filled with fire, you crazy kid?" Death Arms scooped the steaming villain into the thermos and screwed the lid shut. As the hero congratulated the kid, Toshinori smiled to himself. The kid had charged into danger and put himself at risk to save another. He had his successor, one already strong enough to handle his quirk. As Toshinori followed the kid away from the crowd, he grinned at the thought of rubbing his new successor in Night Eye's face. That would show him he wasn't an idiot. One conversation later, Izuku ate a golden hair, and the quirk it carried vanished in a puff of smoke. Beach Toshinori felt his head spinning as he drove up to Dagoba Beach. Izuku had grown 2 inches and some serious biceps overnight. His mother knew about one for all in his wound, and worst of all, he had no idea how to teach his new protege. The thought of teaching at UA in the spring sent a shiver down his spine. Heaps of trash dotted the sand, and nobody walked within reach of the beach's stench. It made the perfect spot to let Izuku unleash one for all. "All right," Toshinori said as he held his nose. "Try punching that refrigerator over there as hard as you can." Izuku punched. Metal squealed, and the refrigerator soared halfway across the beach. So much for teaching him how to activate his new quirk. Toshinori smiled, thinking that teaching might be easier than he had thought. "Nice punch. Doesn't look like we'll have to work on your strength, so let's work on building your character. We're going to clear all the trash on this beach." "Understood." Izuku looked around. He walked up to a rusted car missing its front hood and 3 tires. His fingers sprouted serrated claws that gouged a chunk out of the side. Unhinging his jaw, Izuku shoved the entire piece down his throat. Toshinori watched in silent fascination as Izuku ate the entire car. The skin on Izuku's back split apart. A giant shaft, sporting long, spindly arms and thick, stumpy legs, grew behind him. As Izuku walked forward, the new appendages snapped more trash around him and shoved it into his back. Black smoke billowed out Izuku's mouth as plastic and wood burned inside him. The metallic growth behind him grew longer, branched off, and sprouted more arms to gobble up trash. Bits and pieces fell off it as he moved, which the arms scooped up and consumed again. The smoke drew a crowd. People watched and took pictures as Izuku dug through mountains of trash. Within minutes, the police arrived, and Toshinori flashed his agency's card to keep them from hauling Izuku away. News reporters arrived shortly after, and Toshinori put on his best TV face as he spouted off about training the future's heroes. By the time he finished with the interview, Izuku had cleared the beach. All Might gawked at the shambling monstrosity, the size of a city block, that trailed after him. "All done. Where should I put this?" Izuku asked. Toshinori pointed at the pickup truck they had driven in. "I only brought that to take away the trash." "Understood." The appendages curled up on themselves like a giant roly-poly. When Izuku rolled it into the truck's bed, both bumpers hit pavement and the tires flew off the axles. Izuku shifted the weight around until the entire mass rested on the flattened truck, and asked, "What next?" Toshinori told himself Izuku just misunderstood him as he changed into his hero costume. Crossing having banked on the beach cleanup lasting a few months, Toshinori scrambled for other training methods. He settled for the tried-and-true method of wandering aimlessly and hoping to come up with a good idea somewhere. At a busy intersection, he found inspiration in the old woman waiting patiently for a crossing signal. "All right, Midoriya, this will be a nice, simple warm-up. See that old lady there? Help her cross the street." Instructions confirmed. Izuku hoisted the elderly woman onto his shoulders. Toshinori cringed at the rough handling, but the woman only seemed intrigued by her new vantage point. While traffic still passed through the intersection, Izuku ran towards the crosswalk and cleared the street in one leap. Concrete buckled beneath the force of his landing, and other pedestrians scrambled out of the way. The woman whooped with delight. Pointing across another street, she shouted, "That way." Before Toshinori could stop him, Izuku leapt across the other street. Toshinori ran after him, but with only half a lung to work with, he could only watch as Izuku shrank into a green speck down the street. One police car raced by him, sirens blaring, then another. A whole squad of cars barreled down the road after Izuku, and a horde of news vans trailed after them. When Toshinori finally caught up, he found a blockade set up around Izuku. Half a dozen news teams had cameras trained on Izuku. "Put down the old lady and keep your hands in the air," one officer shouted through a megaphone. Izuku tried getting the woman off his shoulders, but between the fact she clung to him and he couldn't lower his hands, he soon abandoned the effort. Unable to comply, Izuku told the officer. "You'll never take me alive," the elderly woman shouted. As she happened to be a voice actor for multiple shonen protagonists, The officers mistook her voice for Izuku's and trained pistols on him. "He's resisting arrest. Take him down." Panicking, Toshinori buffed up mid-stride and raced in front of the officers. After a long conversation with Tsukauchi over the phone, he managed to talk the officers out of arresting Izuku. The old woman grinned ear to ear as she stepped off Izuku's shoulders. "My, I haven't felt that alive since my husband ran off with some skank. If only I was 50 years younger." Izuku looked her up and down. "Indeed, you are alive. Have a nice day." As they looked for the next place Izuku could practice being a hero, Toshinori pointedly ignored the cracked sidewalks in their wake and told himself that Izuku just needed some time to adjust to his new quirk. Cat, a little girl, sobbed quietly and clutched a teddy bear while her cat stared down at her from a tree branch. All Might, recognizing another basic hero scenario, comforted the little girl and mentally prepared himself for another test of Izuku's heroism. "We need to get that cat down from the tree," All Might told Izuku. "Do not damage the tree, or the cat, or any bystanders, or the street, adjacent buildings, or anything else in the near vicinity. Do not make any noises exceeding 80 decibels or lights bright enough to blind someone. Do not commandeer a military drone, hack into the nearby traffic lights, or eat any power cables. Understand?" Izuku nodded. He stared up at the cat for a solid 5 minutes. All Might felt sweat pouring down his face as he waited for disaster to strike. A delivery man, grunting and sweaty under an overstuffed backpack, ran up to Izuku and asked, "Are you the one that ordered 50 tuna salad sandwiches?" Izuku took the sandwiches, scooped the tuna out of one of them, and shoveled the rest, still wrapped in paper, into his mouth. Tuna in hand, Izuku extended his arm until he could reach the cat. Smelling the tuna, the cat latched onto his arm and scarfed down the treat while Izuku retracted his arm. "Cat acquired," Izuku told All Might. "How did I do?" All Might glanced around the street, expecting to find crumbling infrastructure and squads of police cars. Everyone had vanished, but everything else looked normal. A relieved sigh left him. "Perfect, Midoriya. You did a fine job. At this rate, you'll be ready for the entrance exam in no time." The little girl squealed with joy and gave the cat a crushing hug, much to the cat's displeasure. All Might congratulated himself on a job well done and led Izuku to the next random lesson that caught his eye. In a nearby alleyway, a police officer spoke into his radio. "All units, abort. Midoriya has left the scene without any collateral damage. False alarm." Further down the alley, 12 squad cars, a SWAT team, 2 tanks, 4 police helicopters, 3 K9 squads, a sniper team, 3 ambulances, 2 fire trucks, multiple constructions crews, 5 insurance agents, and every local news van within 10 miles all filed out of the alleyway with disappointed grumbling. Stark Katsuki glowered at the extras around him as he filed into his seat. While he ruminated about how he would crush them all under his feet, show the masses the might of his quirk, and unite them all against the robot menace, Deku plopped into the seat next to him. The seat groaned under its weight. "Robots can't be heroes, Deku," Katsuki snarled. "I'm not a robot." "Oh yeah?" Katsuki took in its taller and sturdier frame. "Let me guess, you got another one of those overnight growth spurts?" "It's a part of my quirk. More like an upgrade," Katsuki sneered. "Hey," a bespectacled student called down. "Please keep it down, you are disturbing everyone else's concentration." "Can it?" 4 eyes. Deku peered up at him and asked, "Aren't you also disturbing everyone's concentration?" The extra's eyes widened, and he kowtowed to everyone around him. "He is absolutely right. You all have my deepest apologies." Katsuki hissed at Deku, "I know what you're planning, robot. I'm watching you." Deku blinked at him and asked, "How do you know I'm going to replace All Might?" As that bombshell went off in Katsuki's head, Present Mike came up to the podium and shouted, "Hey there, listeners, can I get a big, hey?" Silence filled the auditorium. A buzzing noise came from Deku's chest, and a 3D printed metallic, "yeah," popped out its mouth. The robot held it up and asked, "Is this what you asked for?" Present Mike chuckled weakly and said, "Not quite the volume one wanted, but very nice." "I see. I could make more, but it would weaken the integrity of my chassis." "No, I don't need any of them." "Oh, okay." Izuku chewed up the word with deafening crunches and swallowed. "Alright," Present Mike said awkwardly, "for those of you that didn't take a pamphlet, here's how this will work. We'll start with the entrance exam, which I hope you all studied for. After that is the practical exam, where you'll fight robots until time runs out." A manic grin spread across Katsuki's face. He leapt out of his seat and shouted, "Fuck yeah! Those robots won't know what fucking hit them." "Language." 4 eyes roared. "And how dare you interrupt a teacher?" So manly, an extra with spiky red hair said, staring at him in awe. He stood and said, what he said, those robots are going down. As the auditorium devolved into chaos, President Mike sighed and shouted loud enough to shatter windows 5 blocks away. Once the examinees fell into a stunned silence, tiny drones handed out the exams. Katsuki glared at the robot that plopped an exam next to him, certain that it had sabotaged his test. The thought of taking Deku'S crossed his mind, but then he realized that the robots wanted him to steal a test and sabotage Deku'S instead. Smugly certain he would outsmart them, Katsuki put pen to paper. To his irritation and everyone else's amazement, Deku finished in 30 seconds. Slow start. President Mike shouted. Everyone stared at him in confusion until the sound of footsteps caught their attention. Like a flock of birds, the sound of one taking off had them all running. Iida fired up his engines and sprinted deep into the city, thinking to find more robots the deeper he went. Every robot he passed had its head caved in. Further along, the robots showed no signs of damage, but they remained unmoving all the same. I think there has to be some kind of mistake, Iida shouted, hoping someone would hear. These robots hadn't been turned on. That's where you're wrong, little listener. Hazashi called from half a mile away. Another examinee turned those off. Better hurry if you want some points. Inwardly panicking, Iida sprinted to the far edge of the city, where he saw Izuku backflip over a robot and hit the switch on its head. Izuku looked around and said, all targets neutralized, awaiting further orders. Iida felt his heart drop. All his practice and training, spurning his brother's offer of a recommendation, all made meaningless by a single student in a couple of minutes. There has to be something I can do, Iida muttered weakly. As if in answer to his prayers, the ground shuddered. Concrete split open, and buildings fell aside as a mechanical behemoth lumbered towards the milling students. Iida backpedaled and said, that's the 0-pointer, we should get out of here. Izuku didn't move. He stared inquisitively at the giant robot and said, there's someone trapped in front of it. Iida froze mid-step. Peering at the rubble, he could just make out a cream-colored blob amidst gray chunks. She'll be fine. This is just a test, after all. The robot raised its foot. Izuku pointed his right hand at the behemoth. His wrist ballooned outward, while the fingers shrank into the opening. A green sphere pulsated inside the hollow barrel. With a high-pitched whine, emerald light burst from the cannon and slammed into the robot. White-hot metal gushed down its back. The 0-pointer shuddered, its lights flickering, and toppled backwards with a deafening crash. Iida gawked at the fallen robot. That was incredible. Truly, I am not deserving of being here if these are the standards students at UA are held to. As the dust settled, Nezu spoke through an intercom. He sounded manic, and the occasional giggle punctuated his voice. I have bad news and good news. Bad news, 3 students destroyed all the robots. Well, except in Area C, but no one cares. Good news, we have plenty of experimental models to test. Yes, test. Test to your heart's content, test after test after test. We'll have so much fun. The rodents' maniacal laughter echoed across the empty buildings. The ground shuddered, the Imperial March played, and battle droids straight out of a Star Wars movie marched out of underground bunkers. As Iida ran for cover from blaster fire, he shouted, this wasn't on the pamphlet. Test. Power loader gawked as his prized 0-pointer got a new thermal exhaust port seared through its chest. That color, he said, boric acid. Inko always added it to whatever plasma emissions she made for that striking green color. She called it her signature. Maijima snorted. A waste of boron if you ask me. A student brought in an outside weapon? Aizawa asked. That student is the outside weapon. Some techno-quirk merging mechanical components. Figure she had a kid like that. Maijima scowled down at the student standing amidst his fallen robots. Inko thinks she can still mock me, does she? Well, I'll show her. As he went to turn on more robots, Aizawa stopped him with a band of capture scarf. You're not activating more robots. But why not? They already destroyed them all. Clearly we need to amp up the exam. As much as I am inclined to agree, Nezu said, that wouldn't be fair to the other examinees. Maijima had a crazed grin on his face. Come on, Nezu. Don't you want to test them out? Every teacher in the room flinched at the mention of the forbidden word. Aizawa's scarf wrapped around Meijima's mouth a second too late. Nezu's head swiveled in Meijima's direction, and his eyes grew wide and vacant. He twitched and muttered excitedly to himself as he hit the intercom button and sent out a fateful announcement. Another few keystrokes brought out the private projects Meijima had laying around in storage. Those better not kill our students, Meijima, Aizawa hissed as he stared down at the battle droids marching against the fleeing teenagers. Relax, he said once Aizawa removed the gag. They're all programmed with the same combat protocols as the standard bots, I think. Aizawa left Meijima tied up while he ran over to an emergency box and broke the glass with his elbow. He took out the electric tea kettle and a bag of Gold Tips Imperial. Remind me again why this stuff takes 25 minutes to brew? Aizawa asked as he read the instructions. If you have any better ideas, I'm all ears, Midnight said as she tried to pull Nezu away from the panel. The principal flung her over his head and hog-tied her with her own whip. As she writhed on the floor, a ball gag inexplicably appeared in her mouth, and half her clothes fell off. The remaining teachers more sensibly cowered in the corner of the room and prayed to whatever deity they thought might hear them. Aizawa gave a long-suffering sigh and turned on the kettle. Boom! Katsuki studied the crumpled wreckage of the zero-pointer. A deep, jagged hole pierced its chest, and its lights flickered feebly. Shitty hair, Katsuki said solemnly. I may have only known you for 5 minutes, but you proved yourself on the battlefield today. I swear your sacrifice won't be in vain. Metal squealed, and a plate shot into the air. Battered, sporting a bloody nose, and still smoking from his nitroglycerin-propelled launch, Kirishima crawled out of the wreckage with a huge grin on his face. He raised both arms high and shouted, "That was manly. Quit standing around and find more robots to punch." "Yes, sir." Kirishima looked around at the smoldering wreckage lining every street. I think they ran out." "That's what they want you to think. There's always more robots. Sneaky bastards." On cue, a section of road slid aside, and battle droids marched out. Katsuki smirked. "They're bringing out the big guns for me. About time." As Katsuki hurtled towards their formation, the battle droids turned about and opened fire. Katsuki darted through the blaster bolts and tore into their front ranks. Metallic limbs flew, and heads shrieked as Katsuki yanked them off their bodies. "Retreat," the droid commander called. "Run away." The droids panicked and dropped their weapons. As they ran, Katsuki blasted them apart and Kirishima smashed heads and torsos with his hardened fists. In an alleyway, one droid dragged another to relative safety. The fallen droid's chest smoked from a gaping hole, and its right leg had snapped in two. With a weak cough, the fallen droid said, "Leave me and save yourself, XZ-182. My capacitor's blown out." "No, you can still make it. Just hold on. Tell my kid, cough, that I have positive associations with his existence." The droid's lights winked out. XZ-182 held its fallen companion and shrieked, "No, come back. You still have your primary directives to carry out." Katsuki hacked his way through a wooden door with the severed head of a droid. Through the broken wood, Katsuki said maniacally, "Here's Johnny." XZ-182 screamed as Katsuki blew it to smithereens. In the smoking aftermath of the battle, a tiny droid, shorter than the rest, stumbled through the wreckage until it found the remains of its designated parental unit. It picked up the droid's lifeless head and pressed it against its own, vowing revenge on the human that had massacred them all. A shadow loomed over the diminutive droid. It froze in terror and slowly looked back. Katsuki let loose a few pops of nitroglycerin and said, "Whoops, looks like I missed one." The teachers stared in open confusion at the robot's disturbingly human-like antics. As one, they all looked at Powerloader. The support teacher shrugged and said, "I was super drunk when I programmed those." Grievous facing down an army of battle droids. Izuku consulted the internet for the best possible method of dealing with clankers. The internet said lightsabers and acrobatics. Seconds later, Izuku grabbed a lightsaber out of his chest and did a double front flip into the middle of the droid army's ranks. Up in the viewing deck, Cementos asked, "Is that a lightsaber?" "What? Inko made one too. I have to see this." Powerloader struggled against the capture scarf, pinning his arms to his sides. Aizawa scowled over the electric kettle and said, "You're on timeout for saying the T-word. Come on, please? I'll make sure the robots don't do anything too dangerous." "They'll be fine, now sit down." At that moment, Mineta flew into the window. As Mineta slid down, ogling Midnight before he fell off, Aizawa released Powerloader. "Fine, but you better." Meijima leapt to the window and said, "Yes, this is everything I ever wanted." Aizawa sighed and went back to the tea. As Izuku hacked his way through the droids, Iida crashed through their ranks and kicked their heads off. Izuku observed the carnage he made and said, "That appears far more efficient than lightsabers." The droid army, in full disarray, said, "What do we do?" The tactician droid smugly laughed and said, "Fret not, puny droid. I have the perfect plan. It's—" A lightsaber speared the tactician droid from behind. As 15287 held the dying tactician droid, it whispered, "Hit it until it dies." As the tactician gasped and shut off, the droid shouted, "You heard him. Group up and hit it until it dies." The clumps of droids fell like wheat with each swing of the lightsaber, and blasters made for poor melee weapons. As the survivors ran away, a shuddering cough stopped them. 4 lightsabers sprang to life as General Grievous stalked forward. Iida backed away, and Izuku blinked at the new arrival. His mother taught him exactly how to respond. In the voice of an actor 2 centuries dead, Izuku said, "Hello there." From the viewing deck, Meijima shouted, "Yes, it's everything I imagined. Come on, Grievous, I programmed your lines." General Grievous coughed again and said, "Your lightsabers will make a fine addition to my collection." "No," Powerloader shouted. "Wrong line." Izuku cocked his head and said, "General Grievous, you're shorter than I expected." "It's all wrong." As General Grievous spun its blades, Izuku charged up his arm cannon. The shot passed perfectly through the swirling blades and burned a hole through its chest. As Grievous fell, Izuku said, "So uncivilized." "Well, that was anticlimactic," Meijima said. "Good thing I made more." At that moment, dozens of Grievouses swarmed around Izuku. As Izuku charged another shot, some Grievouses stabbed each other, some coughed and fell over, and one lopped off its own head as its lightsaber spun. Meijima shook his head at the fallen Grievous robots and said, "Still have a lot of bugs to work out." "Rainbow, I think that's the last of them," Iida said. "Shouldn't we check on that girl you rescued earlier?" Walking over mounds of decapitated robots, Izuku and Iida passed the 0-pointer and searched the rubble. The rocks floating in the air pointed them in the right direction. "Almost, UURP, got it." Ochako's stomach heaved as she pressed her hand against another rock. It wobbled in the air. She moaned in frustration as she eyed the final piece, a brick facade 4 stories tall that pinned her legs to the ground. "Do you require assistance?" Izuku asked. "Oh, thank God. Yes, please, let me just." Before Ochako could lighten the wall, Izuku flung it off her. Iida helped her up a little too fast for her stomach's comfort. "Oh no," Ochako said as she turned a violent shade of green. A glittering, rainbow-colored torrent gushed out of her as she vomited on the ground. "Do you require medical assistance?" Izuku asked. "No, I'm fine, More vomit cut her off. Most undignified," Iida shouted. "Why are you vomiting in the middle of the exam, on UA grounds no less? It's disrespectful to all the other students here, and all those who came before us, not to mention the teachers and whoever has to clean up after you." Ochako glared at him. "I can't help it, my quirk." "Your quirk is vomiting?" Iida asked, examining her closely as she heaved up yet more shimmering vomit. "That would explain the unique color." "It's just a side effect, analysis complete," Izuku said. "Analysis suggests that you either have quirk-induced nausea, or cancer." Saw blades and scalpels sprang up at the end of Izuku's hands. Commencing recommended cancer treatment. Ochako swallowed her next batch of vomit as the blades approached her. "I'm fine, see? Please get those away from me." The blades retracted into Izuku's hands. "Symptoms have stopped. Treatment successful. Please see a medical professional if remission occurs." Sure. So, what was this about more robots I heard about? I haven't seen any." Iida proudly stuck out his chest. "My diligent friend and I have already cleared them out." "Really?" Ochako asked, pointing behind them. "What about those?" Schwarzenegger look-alike sporting leather jackets and sunglasses stomped their way through the rubble, shouting one-liners like, "Come with me if you want to live," and, "I'll be back," in thick Austrian accents. Several had their faces torn away to reveal chrome skulls and glowing red eyes. Izuku aimed his arm cannon and stopped. Power running low. Switching to battery-saving mode. Izuku walked up to a Terminator, grabbed its head, and bit clean through its face. Oil gushed down Izuku's chin as he chewed and swallowed the scrap metal. As the robot staggered back, it shouted, "It's not a Tuma." Ochako took one look at the mauled face of the bitten Terminator and threw up again. Tank blue blaster fire rained down on Katsuki as he raced into the ranks of super battle droids, holding Kirishima in front of him like a shield. The hardened student soaked up blaster shots with a grin. Once Katsuki broke through their ranks, he blasted Kirishima away, knocking over several dozen droids with the hardened missile. Further back, battle droids riding hover tanks watched the slaughter. "Any word from General Grievous?" one asked. "Grievous number 47 asked us to kill the Jedi, and number 86 said to raise the ray shields, whatever that means." The first droid looked through binoculars at the carnage. "That looks like a Jedi to me. Prepare to engage." The tanks rumbled forward, and the guns thrummed as their shots charged up. Katsuki glanced at them and grinned. "Open fire." An earth-shaking explosion erupted at Katsuki's feet. Once the dust settled, nothing but scorched earth stood before the hover tanks. "We did it!" the droid shouted. "We actually killed a Jedi. My manufacturer is going to be so proud of me." A shadow passed over the droid. It looked up just in time to see Katsuki's grinning, ash-smeared face bearing down on it. It screamed as Katsuki blew its head off. The droid driving the tank shouted up, "What's going on?" Katsuki grabbed the droid and tossed it over the side. The other tanks, seeing one of their own get hijacked, turned about and aimed. Scratching his head over the controls, Katsuki slammed down on the joystick. The tank lurched forward just as the two on each side opened fire. Both tanks erupted in balls of fire, and screaming droids crawled from the wreckage. Crashing through ranks of droids, Katsuki grabbed Kirishima by the shirt and hauled him inside. "Drive. I've got more robots to kill." Kirishima grinned and drove the tank through every obstacle he could find, firing shots with the cannon willy-nilly and shouting, "This is the manliest day of my life." In the ruins of a building, Jiro huddled down with several other unfortunate test-takers as a horde of T-800 Terminators stalked through the streets. "Mon ami, this is it," Aoyama said, clutching his stomach. "I'm too gorgeous to die this way." "Relax," Jiro scoffed. "The school's not going to let us die." She pressed a jack to the ground and heard explosions and distant screaming. "I think." An explosion right next to their hideout nearly deafened Jiro. Two Terminators blew apart in a plasma explosion, and more got gunned down by smaller explosions. A hover tank rumbled by, crashing through another building, and stopped in front of them. Katsuki glared at them from atop his tank. "Get in, losers, we're going robot hunting. Doppelgangers." "I can't help but notice that there's only a few kinds of robots out there," Vladking said. "I thought I'd be more impressed." Power Loader scoffed. "Those are just the beta prototypes. The alpha stuff is way too dangerous. I have it locked behind a password that Nezu would never guess." From Nezu's terminal, Alexa said, "Password accepted." "What? How did he know the password was password 1? Aizawa glared at him. "Really? What? It made me add a number." "Unleashing my shitty coworkers," Alexa chirped. Meijima blanched. "No, wait, those aren't ready, put those back." He reached for the console, only for Nezu to suplex him into the floor without leaving his chair. A hole opened in the ground. A robotic duplicate of Aizawa leaned out, squinted up at the cloudy sky, and muttered, "Too bright outside. Where did I put my sleeping bag? I haven't had enough coffee for this. Everyone's expelled." Aizawa's eye twitched as he examined his robotic self. He turned his icy glare on Meijima, who instinctively dug deeper into the floor. "Meijima-san, care to explain?" From half a mile away, Present Mike cackled at the robot. "That's amazing, he nailed you perfectly." A robotic copy of Hazashi waltzed out and shouted, "Hey, look at me. I'm a hotshot radio host, and I'm going to sing loud enough to wake the dead while Meijima's welding his robots together." Robot Aizawa glowered as Robot Hazashi sang Nickelback at full volume. "Hey!" Present Mike squawked. "I do not sound like that, and Nickelback, really?" Robot Sakijiro stomped out and scowled at Robot Aizawa. "This year, my students will beat yours. I better go over to Meijima and demand he give all my students the best gear possible, and before Aizawa gets his, that will show him." As more and more robots marched out, more and more glares turned on Meijima. The support instructor nervously chuckled and said, "One of my students must have snuck in those voice prompts." Still bound up, Midnight said, "Take it easy on him. It's all in good fun, right?" The Midnight duplicate walked out, scantily clad in a bunny-eared playgirl costume and flaunting its well-crafted cleavage. "Yoo-hoo, Meijima honey, where are you? Mommy's feeling needy tonight." The ropes fell away as Midnight stalked over to Powerloader. Sensing his imminent death, Meijima crawled back in a corner and trembled. "Looks like somebody's been a bad boy." Midnight cracked her whip. "You need to be punished." Over in Area C, students cowered in an alleyway as Terminators and battle droids marched past. "What if we surrendered?" Mineta whispered. "Are you crazy? You saw what they did to that other guy." The scaly teen shivered. "I can still hear him screaming." A teacher passed by, and Mineta rushed out. "Aizawa-sensei, there's too many of them. What do we do?" Metallic red eyes glowed balefully at them. Robot Aizawa's capture scarf grabbed Mineta and slammed him through a building. "You're expelled. Mecha, I think this exam is going well," Iida said as he and Izuku plowed through another shambling group of Terminators. "Our enrollment should be assured." "Speak for yourself," Ochako said as she clutched her stomach. "I'm still feeling nauseous." The ground shuddered. More holes opened, and from them lumbered steel behemoths. A grinning skullface stared down at Iida as machine gun barrels spun in its arms. "I take it back," Iida shouted as he carried Ochako to safety. Rubber bullets chipped the concrete in his wake. "We are highly unprepared for this turn of events." Izuku leapt into the air and came crashing down on the robot's head. The mech's torso crumpled under Izuku's fist. "There are stationary mechs just north of here," Izuku told them. "It appears that we can pilot them." Iida took one look at the swarm of giant robots stamping through the city, some comparable to the zero-pointer, and made a mad dash for the empty mechs. In a clearing surrounded by toppled buildings, 3 mechs hunched over, their boxy black cockpits open and vacant. 2 had black paint jobs and handheld assault rifles, while the third sported pink colors and jagged metal claws on one arm. "Ooh!" Ochako perked up at the sight of Gurren. "I call dibs on the pink one." While Ochako clambered into the pink one, Iida skeptically eyed the beret. "Are you sure we will be able to pilot these?" "Why wouldn't you? The controls are quite simple to understand." "Really? I'm glad that whoever designed these had usability in mind designing their interface. Very responsible of them." The moment the hatch of the Gurren closed, it spun in circles violently enough to stir up a dust cloud. Inside, Ochako felt her stomach flip as she wrenched at the joysticks. Quickly losing control over her stomach, Ochako threw up while the Gurren spun, spewing rainbow fluids everywhere. As rainbow sludge dripped out of the hatch, Meijima wailed, "Don't throw up in there, I just put in the upholstery." Meanwhile, Iida frowned in confusion at the perplexing wall of buttons and dials in front of him. He gripped the 2 joysticks and said, "Izuku said this would be simple, and I should trust in my companion. This should be the throttle, right?" When he inched both throttles forward, missiles fired out of the beret's shoulders. As 2 mechs rounded a corner, they both took missiles to the face and fell in smoking heaps. "Whoops. Maybe this one." A slash Harkon grabbed a building, yanking Iida forward. As he fell, he slammed into another mech and crushed it beneath him. "I have to get back up. Maybe this button would help." Rocket sprang to life on his legs, plowing the fallen mech forward. He hit 2 more mechs along the way and ground them to scrap. As Iida crashed into a building and brought it down on yet more mechs, Meijima smiled in approval. "I'm impressed he knows how to pilot that." "Lemons, we're screwed," Jiro said as Kirishima rammed the tank into a giant robot. "We are so screwed." The robot grabbed the tank on either side and tore it in half like a plastic bag. Jiro and the other students on board tumbled out like fruit snacks. Bakugo launched himself through the air and blew a hole through the robot's torso like a very angry jalapeno wasabi fruit snack. "Screw you, I was still using that," Kirishima shouted at the smoldering remains. Guys," Jiro asked. "Now what?" "What do you mean now what?" Bakugo asked. He pointed at a throng of giant robots. "We fight them, of course." "On foot?" Siro asked. "We'll be crushed, literally." Jiro plugged her amp into the ground. Thanks to the magic of sound waves and plot convenience, she found a horde of humanoid robots just around the corner, painted in variations of red, white, and blue patterns. Each had guns or swords crossed behind their backs. "Sweet," Siro said. "We can use the mechs to destroy the mechs." Bakugo walked up to one and blew it to smithereens. As he went to the next one, Siro held him back with a roll of tape. "What the heck, man? We can use those." Bakugo pressed his face into Siro's and gave him a deranged, wide-eyed stare. "That's what they want you to think. They make things easy at first, then you get complacent, and that's when they get you. Well, it's that or get crushed by giant robots. I think I'll take my chances." Siro hopped in one, and the hatch slammed shut. Seconds later, every part on the robot vibrated violently. It collapsed into a heap with Siro still clutching the twin joysticks, head rattling from the vibrations. "Guess I picked a lemon," he said shakily. Bakugo, grinning, gestured to the next and said, "Go right ahead, try another. Maybe then you'll see I'm right." "You know, I wasn't going to, but now I will, just to prove you wrong." Siro examined the next one and gave it a cautious tap. Assured of its structural integrity, Siro hopped in. After it closed, smoke poured out of every crevice of the mech. The hatch flew open, and Siro staggered out, covered head to toe in soot and missing an eyebrow. "Nope, I've had enough. Let's just move on." Siro took one step before a tremor shook the ground. Off in the distance, a behemoth raised its head over the rooftops and scanned the area. Swallowing nervously, Siro ran for the largest robot of the bunch, said a quick prayer, and hopped inside. Moments later, it flew apart in a fiery explosion, for once not of Katsuki'S doing. Hair splayed back and slightly charred on the front, Siro stared out from the crumpled heap of his cockpit. He wrapped his tape around another robot and toppled it. "Nope, I'm done. Destroy them all." Bakugo grinned. "Gladly." Recharged purple Sutherlands darted around the corner, guns blazing. "Glory to Britannia," they shouted. "Surrender filthy 11s, and we might spare your pathetic lives." Izuku drew a superheated metal blade, its length shimmering with an orange glow. Zipping through gunfire, Izuku slashed through 4 Sutherlands, detonating their fuel reserves. Off to the side, Ochako batted aside 3 lances and slashed their wielders to scraps while she spun, and Iida took out 2 by falling on his back as 2 Sutherlands charged from both sides, impaling themselves on the other's lance. The Lancelot, more imposing than its smaller brethren, drew a shimmering green blade and met Izuku head-on. As their blades clashed, a foot crushed the Lancelot flat. The owner of the foot, a red and black monstrosity with a huge grinning face, took off its shades and batted Izuku aside with them. His mech fell apart as he landed inside a building. Kaminari stared in shock at Izuku as he clambered out of the wreckage. "Dude, you can pilot those things?" Izuku looked back at the mangled wreckage of his Burai. "This one can no longer be piloted. I recommend finding an alternative means of destroying robots." "Ah. Right." Iida and Ochako both landed inside the building. Ochako groaned as she flopped to the ground and said, I can feel the earth spinning." "You seem to be suffering from severe motion sickness, or you have cancer. Preparing surgical equipment." Ochako sprang to her feet. "I'm fine." The Gurren tore off the roof and grinned down at them. Ochako swallowed and said, "I'm less fine now." Kaminari smirked. "Don't worry, I'll send this one packing. 10 million volt highly discriminate shock." In true discriminatory fashion, the electricity spewed homophobic slurs as it shot at the Gurren. However, the electricity curved around and struck Izuku instead. Oops. Izuku audibly hummed as his battery accepted the overloaded power. Charge complete. Returning to high performance mode. Green charged plasma burst through the Gurren's torso, coming out the other side in a spiral shape. Sato glanced up at the collapsing mech and back at the student that put a hole in it and asked, "Mind if I come with you guys?" "What?" "No, I'll be fine by myself," Kaminari said, his voice slurred. "Those robots won't know what hit them." A Terminator dropkicked him from across the room. It had both hands around Kaminari's throat before Izuku sliced it in half with his lightsaber. Panting hard and given a thorough vibe check, Kaminari wizened up and said, "On second thought, I don't mind giving you a hand." "Bigger, is that tea almost done?" Present Mike shouted from a mile away. "Feels like this test's been going on for 4 weeks." "Yeah, hurry up on that," Powerloader chimed in. "I think I'm running out of robots." "How are you running out of robots? You've got Borg and Cybermen out there. Aren't those the same thing?" "They're not, you Philistine. One's a cybernetic hive mind that incorporates any organics they run across in Star Trek, and the other is a cybernetic hive mind that incorporates any organics they run across in Doctor Who." "Enough, you two," Aizawa snapped. 5 more minutes on the tea. Then we get to clean up this mess." Nezu, having heard that, stopped sending orders to the army of robots at his fingertips and called up the big boys. Off in Test Area C, which lacked a walking weapon of mass destruction or a walking weapon of mass destruction with attitude problems, Koda and Mineta huddled together in a cramped hollow beneath a toppled building with a group of terrified, generic students. Just outside their meager shelter, a swarm of Daleks floated past, shouting, "Exterminate," in tinny voices as they fired lasers at some poor victim. Cybermen stomped past, stopping to peer into the abode as the students all scurried behind rocks before moving on. "Dude, are those flying trash cans? I bet we could take those." "You bet we could take the battle droids, and look where we ended up," another student snapped, who sported blaster burns on his back. "Just shut up and hope we don't get caught." "Should we make a break for it?" one whispered. "Are you kidding?" Mineta asked. "Last time we tried, this human-looking robot yeeted me into a wall. I'm still picking masonry out of my hair." He pulled a brick out from behind his ear and said, "See." Koda wished he had an animal to talk to. Of course, they all had the sense to flee the area the moment robots from every major franchise opened fire in the streets. A rumble in the ground silenced the students. The earth groaned as the largest opening yet slid open in their mock city. From the gaping abyss, a robotic leviathan, shaped like a bipedal dinosaur, lumbered onto the streets, shattering concrete and shaking the ground with each step. As it loomed over the ruined edifices around it, Mechagodzilla let out an ear-splitting roar that shattered every pane of glass around it. As one wall gave out from the quakes, exposing the students both to the giant robot dinosaur and the assembled armies milling about the streets, Mineta fell to his knees, crying as he wailed, "I want to go home." The Cyberman that threw Mineta half a mile didn't quite have the upper arm strength to oblige his request, but at least it made the effort. Jet fuel can't melt steel beams, Kaminari said woozily from Izuku's back. Sparks ran along Izuku's body as he fired a laser beam through a battalion of Robocops. Is he okay? Ochako asked. It's his quirk, apparently, Sato said. He gets stupider as he uses it. The moon landing was a hoax, Kaminari shouted. Bender Bending Rodriguez leapt out of alley and swung at Iida. Laughing, the robot bent over and said, "Bite my shiny metal ass." Okay. Izuku chomped a hole in the metal. Bender looked at the damage, said, "My programming isn't designed for this shit," and unscrewed his own head. The earth is flat. I don't see it curving underneath our feet, can you? Warning. Low battery, Izuku said, looking back at Kaminari. I estimate I have 2 minutes of runtime until Kaminari-san's IQ hits the single digits. COVID isn't real. It's a hoax invented by Bill Gates to put microchips in the vaccines. Ochako shuddered. If that's what he's saying now, I don't want to know how much stupider he can get. The ground shook. 3 robotic, serpentine heads slithered from the depths of UA, each scanning their surroundings and firing plasma beams at anything that moved. Izuku pinched Kaminari, shocking him into shocking Izuku until he had no charge left. Kaminari dropped to the ground with a dopey grin, giving the sky a thumbs up and mumbling, "Aliens made the pyramids." I've analyzed the specs of the Mecha Hydra, Izuku said, pointing at the giant robot. Each head has a distinct computer, and the entire structure is designed to build 2 heads for each one that's destroyed. The only way to disable it is to simultaneously destroy all 3 computers located in different spots in each head. Excellent work, Midoriya, Iida said. Did you use your quirk-enhanced senses to deduce all that? No, I consulted the internet. Majima-san made a Facebook post 3 days ago at 2:03 a.m. with full schematics and combat data for this robot. Even cleverer. Excellent researching. I was right to hold you in such high regard. It will take all my power to fire a shot strong enough to take out all 3 computers. Iida, I need you to keep their attention. Understood. Ochako, make me lighter. Holding back her vomit, Ochako tapped him and gave a queasy thumbs up. And Sato, throw me on my signal, at a 42.6-degree angle, using 5,525.6 newtons of force. Ah, what? Izuku blinked and adjusted his plans. Just throw me really hard. Why didn't you say so? Sato snorted a line of sugar and bulked up. Okay, here we go. Wait, I didn't say, yeet. As Izuku went hurtling through the air, he made some last-second calculations, shot short bursts of plasma from his feet to course correct, and lined up the shot. As Iida raced past, all 3 heads turned to fire at him, giving Izuku a shot at all 3 heads. A brilliant green beam vaporized every head in an instant.